Hello, everyone. Salam sejahtera. Very excited to be here, and also very much, very happy to have Dr. Suriani Suratman here with me. She's no stranger to the art scene, especially with her contributions to scholarship, visual arts, and of course, as someone who works with ceramics as well. So today, I will start off with, and hopefully 20 minutes or so, talking a little bit about the evolution of Malay dance in Singapore. Now, I think I prefer standing because I'm a dancer. Um, I personally feel that, whatever I have to talk about today feels like 4, 5 2-hour lectures, because I'm looking at very broad strokes of stuff, but I'm trying to summarize it within 20 minutes. Hopefully, we'll have a interesting day, learning a little bit more about how the Malay dance practice in Singapore has evolved. And I'm looking at a period from the late colonial period all the way till present times. Okay, so, I actually prepared 20, 30 slides, and I'm thinking, I'm not giving a lecture, I'm just giving a broad overview. So this is my one slide, okay? So, you have to be entertained by my, by my voice, by my personality here. So I would like us to think of a white canvas, right? And if you're a painter, you are, placing broad strokes of paint on white canvas. And of course, there will be moments when there are overlapping broad strokes, all right? So today I'm looking at it that way so that we are able to get a gist of what and how Malay dance has evolved through the times. Now, I have chosen 5 broad strokes to talk about today, and I will start first with adaptation. A lot of times when we talk about Malay dance in Singapore, the history that continues to be talked about is a Singaporean Malay dance history. But I think we have strategically said Malay dance in Singapore to think about dancing bodies, dancing communities that have existed prior to the modern nation state that we understand in Singapore today, right? So of course we have to look at pre-Islamic cultures, acknowledging our, of course, indigenous, Hindu, Buddhist roots, animistic roots as well, which are very much inherent within the techniques, the dance movements. And of course, we acknowledge the intercultural hybridization. We look at being Singapore as a port city, Singapore as the place where there are many exchanges, be it cultural, religious, spiritual, right? We look at the legacies of the Hadrami Arabs who have came and, other than also bringing Islam, also provided us with Zafin that eventually became Zapin, right? We look at, Portuguese, when the invasion of Malacca, and also how they have also provided inspiration to what is now known as Joget, and of course from their own Branle, Branyo, right? And without forgetting as well the bangsawan that is being practiced during the late colonial period was very much inspiration from the Parsi theatre atau wayang Parsi tiruan, that eventually became bangsawan and became many other modern theatre forms. Now, I also like us to acknowledge, the colonial regulations and economies. Think about the urban entertainment parks. Think about the municipal ordinances that were drafted, right, to control noise regulation in Singapore in the late 1900s. At a period when Singapore was filled with people from many parts of Asia, it also brought sonic encounters. So what do I mean by sonic encounters? You're bringing noise, or not noise, but sounds from your own culture, right? That eventually, when it's all happening at the same time, became noise, right? And of course, the white colonial masters were not happy, right? They were also wondering how they were able to regulate these noises. So the municipal ordinances came up to regulate how performing arts, should be practiced at what time. And a lot of times, for Asiatic populace, I'm using very colonial terms here, the Asiatic populace were practicing their cultural forms at times which didn't do well with the colonial masters because, like I want to sleep at 12 midnight, but the Chinese wayang operas or the Malays are doing zapin, right? And all of these sonic encounters or sonic happenings were disturbing them because the next day they have to work, right? So the idea of time thrift, the idea that we need to work at certain periods of time and we need to rest, right, was something that also affected dancing, music communities because we had to stop practicing and rest because the colonials were also doing the same, right? And of course, the introduction of cabarets, the introduction of taxi dancing, right? These were all phenomena that were introduced or probably allowing for folk traditions to be co-opted into such colonial practices, right? So for example, taxi dancing. We have taxi dancing in urban entertainment parks, right? Such as New World, Gay World, and Great World. And in this taxi dancing arena, you have Ronggeng girls dancing, and you would pay them a ticket where they will dance for the duration of a Ronggeng repertoire that includes an Asli, Inang, and Joget, right? In those situations, it's not to say that taxi dancing didn't exist, but it came in a different form during in the folk villages, right? When the Ronggeng girls were part of musical ensembles and itinerant musical ensembles that were moving from one village to the next, sometimes staying for a duration of 1 to 2 months, right? Because in that period, you don't have TV, you don't have radio, and this was the only entertainment that was going to come, right? So they were the entertainment for a particular village for close to 2 months, right? So this was a vibrant, dynamic period where there were, of course, opposing practices and also complementary ones. I'm sure in a period where exchange was a very crucial modus operandi, right? A mode of working together. Surely an organic sense of getting to know or adapting from each other was the thing of the day. Now, I'm moving on to nationalisms here. I changed from nationalization to nationalisms because I also wanted to acknowledge how Malay dance to some extent was also facing a lot of issues with contending nationalisms, right? And it was due to such nationalism, a sense of patriotism to a newfound nation state known as Singapore, that there was a beginning of persatuan-persatuans. And this is actually where a lot of Singaporean Malay dance history starts, right? So this persatuan-persatuan known as 4PM, Perkumpulan Seni, Sriwana, for example, were the forefront of trying to introduce Malay dance in a more systematic manner, right? And what also was happening during that time, there were contending nationalisms. What do I mean by contending nationalisms here? We are looking at a time when Indonesia has already, in the 40s going into the 50s, Indonesia has already become a nation state, right? And then, of course, there were conversations about Mafilindo, right? And also, eventually, Malaysia got their independence, and then, of course, us in 1965, after separation from Malaysia in 65. 1963 was when we became Malaysia with Sarawak, Sabah, right? So at that period of time, there were a lot of exchange that was happening. One such luminary that we in Malay dance history we continue to recall and remember is of course Madam Liu Chun Wai or Suriani Liu Chun Wai, and her existence in the 1960s introduced us to dance repertoires that now has become staple or I would say foundational dances that we continue to practice. And Madam Liu herself, when she came in the 50s, she was only 17, right? And she was introducing Malay dance to Nantah University students, right? And this was the predecessor of Nanyang University, Nanyang Technological University. So she came here to teach Chinese students how to do Malay dance, right? Then eventually invited to Sriwana by the late Nong Chik Gani, and then the rest is history, because her contributions to Sriwana and to the Malay dance scene is something that we continue to remember, continue to acknowledge. Right? Of course, she's not the only one. We also acknowledge the presence of Tengku Yohanit and many other Indonesian collaborators that came on after that. And that period of time also, in trying to build a Singapore that was more united, you also have the Aneka Ragam Rakyat. And this was a very interesting concert of many different ethnic dance performances, right? So, and this was something that got toured around, right? Not only in mainland Singapore, also in the offshore islands as well. I will move on to the third broad stroke here, which is internationalization. One of the key moments that we recall and continue to talk about today was the Adelaide Festival, and this was due to the National Dance Company. So National Dance Company was an entity that was created in 1970. And then in 1972 was the very first international invitation, right, to introduce Singapore culture to an Australian audience. And what happened then was, a more concerted effort by the community to think about what could best represent Singapore Malay culture. So this is when, of course, there were conversations about, what are the repertoires that could represent what today is known as the 5 Malay dance music genres, right? Of Asli, Inang, Masri, Joget, Zapin. And notwithstanding that too, we also have a lot of other luminaries within the scene who actually went out to learn and study. Of course, we know of Madam Som Said, who went to learn with Bagong all the way in Yogyakarta. We also, and also Safarina Rahim. And we also acknowledge that we included other Indonesian choreographers into our fold as well, such as Mas Tom Ibnor, and Nordin Daud. Names escape me now, but yeah, they came to introduce to us what is known as Malay, Sumatran Malay culture, such as Achenese dance, Minangkabau dances, Silat, etc. Right? And also during that period of time also, the push for festivalization, right? At that time, in the 70s leading into the 80s, there was the Singapore Arts Festival, where, a lot of these Malay dance troupes also, because only a selected group of dance groups or Malay dance performances were included as part of the Singapore Singapore Arts Festival. And what happened during that time was there was competitions, or at least a judging of sort, of who, which one of the best performances gets to be featured as part of this national event, right? And let's not forget also the Singapore Youth Festival, which is most important as a feeder festival that subsequently produced a lot more dance artists after finishing secondary school. Now, the folklorico. Now, this folklorico is actually a phenomenon that was also happening due to how dance companies wanted to portray many different cultures within the nation state, right? So we see this in Russia, in Philippines, we have Bayanihan. We have all these companies that were making attempts to go to different parts of their country to get to learn about the many different cultural forms that are present within that country. And of course, Mexico is another example, right? So the folklorico was also something that was also happening in Singapore. We wanted to ensure that every racial / ethnic group was represented, right? And hence, the Chinese, Malay, Indian representation. And also, of course, you would see moments when, there is a representation of multiculturalism, right? And subsequently, this is something that continues to live on. We hear of our veterans, like Abang Osman himself, who would also talk about his experiences learning Bharatanatyam, learning Chinese dances when he was part of the National Dance Company, the People's Association Cultural Troupe, right? So now we're coming to a period of the contemporary, of the late 90s coming into the 2000s, where a professionalization has occurred, right? You're seeing more and more Malay dancers become professionals. In 97 was the start of the first Malay dance company that is focused on portraying Malay dance, arts and heritage. That is Sri Warisan Sumsai Performing Arts Limited. Subsequently, of course, we have the professionalization, via many other companies that will come afterwards, like Era Dance Theatre. Now, what happens here is that there is a need for certification. There is a need to acknowledge that Malay dancers also have a breadth of work that they can use, right, as a way to say that we are professionals, we are trained, we are capable, and we are also able to be salaried. Right? So this is when if you can look at professionalization, the second point there, I wrote ROS versus ACRA versus community groups. This is a time when a lot of people were also trying to differentiate who they are, right? Because the ROS, the Registrar of Societies, is a regulation when groups of people are coming together and they want to do work, create work, because I think, it was, if you're more than 4 or 5 people, you're considered illegal gathering. So the registrar, and also because of the reactions to gangs, or not only Chinese gangs, right? So the registrar of societies were created in order to regulate this, right? So a lot of our persatuan are registered under the registrar of societies. Subsequently, we also have the ACRA, where businesses are registered, right? So we do have Malay dance companies that are registered under the ACRA, and they would function differently because they are more business, right? And then, of course, community groups. Now, these are groups that are housed in community centers, right? So a lot of times, back in when I first started dancing, there is always this differentiation between where you came from and what the sort of groups that you were under, right? So because they will all function differently. For example, the registrar of societies, those who are under registrar of societies, you would have annual general meetings where there is a sense of democratization of who becomes the leader, you get elected, etc., right? But ACRA groups would function as a business, and community groups are very hobby like groups, right? But of course, there are overlapping, right? There are groups that are from community groups but registered under ROS as well. In this period as well, we are having a lot of conversations again and again about the authenticity of Malayness in Singapore, right? We have gone through that whole period of multiculturalism. We have gone through that period of trying to promote Malay dance to an overseas audience, right? But then we're also asking, what exactly is Jati Diri Melayu? Right? And you would also hear during meetings or in post-show talks when we are always asking, di mana Melayunya? Kan? And this, we're also asking, di mana Islamnya? Right? So these conversations till today are relevant questions that continues to be questioned in dialogues within the community. We are also thinking about Malay dance now as as high art. We're thinking about how Malay dance can be portrayed as welcoming dancers, as forms that can inaugurate foreign dignitaries, etc. So then a new form like Tari Persembahan becomes a very important repertoire that most groups would have, because they would also be hired by ministries or by companies to greet dignitaries and important people. Today, I personally feel that there is diversification that's happening, right? Especially during the period of COVID, where the rise of independent artists, right? Those who would identify as self-employed persons, and collectives are also emerging, right? Collectives here are independent artists or people who belong to other groups are coming together voluntarily, right? To look at certain issues that they are passionate about, such as the revival of some folk dances, or be it, wanting to create a sense of camaraderie within the community, right? And also, we are seeing a lot more dancers going through our academies, LaSalle and Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts, where they are graduating with academic knowledge of arts management, dance, and theatre. So they are no longer just focused on being dancers, but also being, working as arts administrators, helping to try to find or being not only dancers but also working other supporting roles, right? As crew, as arts, as stage managers, etc. Now, I'm also seeing a neoliberal acclimatization, right? What do I mean by neoliberal here? I mean, I'm used a lot of jargons, but these are jargons which are very relevant to us, like especially when the privatization of the market would mean that there is a competition, right? And there is competing factors, and what happens here, everyone now tries to be unique. What is unique about your skill set? What do you do best? Or maybe I do a dance that is labeled as contemporary. I am a dancer or an artist that looks at the work of of feminist works. So all these terms to use to differentiate our practice is also something that is to do with the neoliberal acclimatization, trying to acknowledge that we are competing with each other for a very small pie of the funds, for example, right? I'm also, and this is something that I wrote in my thesis about the model Malay minority dancer citizen. I'm also acknowledging that to some extent, the scene is also seeing a lot of issues of moralism, right? We are questioning the value of every artist and what they do and why they do what they do, and whether the things that they do goes against religion, goes against culture, right? And I also do feel that it's coming out from a place of, we are always trying to show the very best of our culture, right? If we look at Malay dance as a representation of a people, you would also want to show the very best of a people, right? And being a minority group, that's also something that sometimes you feel that it's best represented as such. And I feel personally that has also come at a place of acknowledging that there are certain things that we can or we cannot do, and this has also become a debate within the community. And I'm saying it out there not so that some people might say that I'm airing my underwear to the world, but I also feel that it's necessary that such conversations are put in place so that we acknowledge the diversity of experiences, the diversity of viewpoints, right? If a community wants to move forward, there is a necessity for intergenerational or multi-generational conversations to occur. And it's not always about who has done it first and who has done it who has done it later or who does it best, right? It's necessary that we acknowledge that there are diverse ways of practicing Malay dance today as opposed to how it was when there was a need for systematizing knowledge. So I think I will end there. So just a recap of the five. Um, I don't see it as happening one after the other. I see this as overlapping broad strokes of adaptation, nationalisms, internationalization, professionalization, and diversification. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Noramin has taken us, with broad strokes, talking about dance, and actually looking at dance as a site, where you see many, or the coming together of many factors, among which the context, the different contexts that he was talking about, pre-Islamic Malay society, colonialism, independence, and then of course nation building, and the contemporary context. I think it's fascinating to be looking at this or taking the perspective that you're taking, where then you can see the interconnections and intersections of different factors. I mean that was how I saw that presentation. I'm very intrigued in the what do you call it, in the coming together of all these factors. But I'm also very intrigued that you as a person, as the coming together of different different aspects, right, of yourself as dancer, choreographer, educator. People would say that you carrying many different hats, but I think it's like we all are make up of many facets. Would you like to say a little bit about that?
I agree that we are one of many, right? So we take on many identities and many roles, and all these roles have also, how helpful all these roles could be in trying to tell a particular story, right? I do feel that my research cannot be without my many different roles, right? I'm first a dancer, and then subsequently eventually becoming a choreographer, a creator, and then a scholar. So that needed time, and also that also allowed for space in which I recognized that my embodied engagement, my corporeality, was also informing my research, right? I do feel that there has been a lacking of research about Malay dance pre nation state, and that was the reason why I did my PhD. I felt that it was necessary to look at what was Malay dance prior to Singapore, and looking at the practice that was dynamic, before becoming a particular structure or a system. I'm not against such structures and systems. I do feel that I have benefited from learning about the 5 Malay dance basics or foundations. It has given me an identity, a jati diri, and I'm also thankful to my predecessors for having paved the way. But also at the same time, I'm also questioning even further about the beginnings of how such systems occur and why it needed to occur. I do understand that it allowed for a new generation of Malays living in the new nation state of Singapore to find a sense of identity. I understand that. We must also acknowledge that we are human beings living in a very globalized world, where conversations regarding multiple identities, conversations about how marginalization of Malays are things that are relevant, and we are facing it here in Singapore, right? To talk about class, to talk about, so I as a contemporary subject or being, it feels necessary that I wanted to find a way, an entry point in which I can look at how history has informed the way we are today, right? So it's just not enough to just talk about the beginnings of 65 as year zero, right? It needs to look beyond that to know how moving bodies, were regulated, and how did we become the way that we are today.
Thank you. I mean, because that, I was looking at that also, of the processes of institutionalization, that I thought you really brought that out from even. Oh, the slides is gone, but from the start of the first broad stroke, during the period, the colonial period, and the regulations of dance performances or practices, that have already been there, actively, moving, across spaces, and then the coming in of those kinds of regulations. So each, and I saw that the each of those stages, were steps, of institutionalizing and regulating, right? And so I guess that's what you were trying to get at, in terms of how we are so much affected, by these decisions, that are made sometimes at a very macro level, and then having to respond to it at the meso as well as the micro, and then the individual level. So I'm curious then, if you, in terms of your experiences, so if you could share a little bit, about your experience in responding to these kinds of or steps, of regulating, whether it is coming from macro or at other levels.
I do feel that as a practitioner scholar, a lot of things have I'm thinking a lot more critically about many things, and it's very, I don't know whether it's a fortunate or unfortunate thing, because I'm also,
It's
sometimes
a hazard of a researcher.
It is.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does feel like I'm questioning my own being. I'm also thinking a lot about, the role that I play, and the position and the power that I hold. I acknowledge my privilege as a researcher, as a scholar, that sometimes I see things in such a complex way, where maybe people who might not have training in hardcore research can see certain things, right? So I'm also saying this also because I do not want to shun away the views of practitioners, which might seem to be, to some extent, conflating a lot of things together, right? But also acknowledging that this is their viewpoint and the way they practice, and how I can best supplement, right? My understanding and my practice, right? So a lot of works that I do personally, doesn't fit in the format of traditional dance presentation, right? I try to question, for example, via the format of the performance lecture, thinking about what it means to be a Malay dancer in comparison to someone who's coming from a Chinese dance background, for example. So that was a way in for me to acknowledge that as much as we are very different in form and technique, the processes that we went through were very similar, right? Of acclimatization, of syncretization, of of diasporic identities. I'm also thinking a lot as somebody who's also questioning the role of gender, right? Today, when we are talking about boundaries, when we're talking about the that we are one of many things, I'm also questioning who I am as somebody who's effeminate. I am born this way. Allah has given me such femininity, right? That sometimes I wonder, when I play on the masculine role, what is lost through that, right? Because we acknowledge that Malay dance as a courtship dance of between a man and a woman, it's necessary that we play on the male gender and the female gender well, so that we acknowledge the harmony of the coming of two sexes, right? But I'm also wondering that how, like, in taking on this role, then what is my own identity as a Malay person also, you know. I'm also questioning too about the place of the term Malay in such a globalized and hybridized world, and also looking at how some of us are focused on finding an authenticity of something that from the very beginning hasn't been authentic fully, right? And what are the processes that made us think that we need to find a Malay authenticity, right? So I'm very grateful as a researcher to having traveled to Medan, Jakarta, Yogyakarta, going to different states in Malaysia, having conversations with scholars and practitioners, trying to understand what does it mean, apa itu jati diri Melayu. And interestingly, I must say that I find jati diri Melayu very much in diasporic communities that is not within the region. Yeah, so interestingly, having conversations with Cape Malays, for example, having conversations with Malays who are now living in Broome, having become pearl divers, moving in the 1920s, right? That experience and asking, what do they retain, right? And what about Malay culture that they transmit to their future generations who are not fully Malay because they intermarried with Aboriginals, you know, or First Nations people in Australia, and asking about what gets retained and what gets discarded, right? So I don't take for granted what identity is. I'm constantly asking, but also at the same time, I acknowledge that Gen Z is also facing that issue today, because most of my students are from the Gen Z generation, so they're also asking, Cikgu, what is this box thing with leaves on it, right? Sila tepak sirih. And I worry, you know, for a tomorrow where they don't know what the tepak sirih is. So I don't think it's a comfortable place to be. It's an uncomfortable place that I'm willing to take on, to constantly ask about identity. Yeah.
You know, you've just opened up more questions, and I can't, like stop wanting to ask more. But what I'm going to hold that those questions. But I want to invite actually the audiences here, open this up a little bit for anyone, yeah, who wants to ask Dr. Noramin questions, or to jump in, or I would say intervene, yeah, in some of the statements that you have shared with us. So anyone who would like to say something, share your thoughts, or have questions?
I would like to ask a questions which I encounter sometime. There is when we watch a Malay dance in a very contemporary format, and we start to question whether that is still a Malay dance or it is just a contemporary dance, and what type of contemporary Malay dance can be grouped under Malay dance that Malay will accept them as Malay dance. I mean, for us is I'm Chinese. Okay, I appreciate all the Malay dances in presented in different way. However, for Malays, they may feel that this doesn't represent our culture. So I just want to ask and see your opinions on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you for that question. A very relevant question, and a question that we continuously grapple today as a community.
But thankfully, it's
Thankfully,
not just
it must happen,
yeah.
because if it doesn't, then it doesn't initiate discourse. Should I respond as a researcher, or should I respond as a
Well,
practitioner?
I'm opening it to you.
Okay. Allah. It's also the issue of labels, right? What is contemporary and what is traditional, and then what constitutes as traditional and what constitutes contemporary. It's a very relevant question to ask, and it's a question that many practitioners, young and old, constantly ask and try to find a solution for it. I have no solution. Of course, we would like to say traditional dance is the 5 basics. It should be that, right? And then contemporary is whatever that comes after the traditional dance form. but still retaining elements of Malay. So I must say that the scene is diverse and that you have differing contemporary expressions of the contemporary, right? You have those who believe that contemporary Malay dance should have elements of the foundational Malay dance embedded in it for it to be known as contemporary Malay dance, and others who feel that even if they're dancing traditional today now at NUS, is really contemporary, right? So this is a factor that constantly plagues us because we are seeing contemporary and traditional as labels, and also there are people who look at what is contemporary in a very temporal manner, meaning to say traditional was what our forefathers have done, contemporary is what we do today, right? So definitely there are very differing ideas of what contemporary is. Okay, as an artist, I see contemporary as what is my lived experience of today, right? And I will always ask that my upbringing as a Malay person is enough to reveal my Malayness, because in my practice my Malayness would naturally just come out because of my background, of my practice as Malay dancer for 20 odd years, right? So it is there. I don't feel a need to include a silat movement just to prove that it's Malay. If the silat comes into the practice because of my practice, then it is what it is. It is contemporary. So it's not an easy question to answer, but it's a relevant question that we hear very often.
My name is Fiza. And I guess that question also kind of back to, for us to kind of think whether there's any relevance of gatekeeping in Malay dance today, especially when we're kind of exploring like multiplicity and diversity of expressions, bodies, identities, and also people making new culture. Like what you say, people don't recognize Tepat Syria anymore, but they recognize something else, Malay identity is also shifting quite a bit. And so I guess, what do you think, on I don't know whether this is kind of putting a bomb on you. Why are we still kind of gatekeeping, or whether there's still a need for it right now?
Thank you. I like to think that gatekeeping occurs because we have very passionate people within the scene. We have people who have put in 20, 30, 40 years of practice, and they would like to not see that the form becomes so diluted, right? Diluted here is also subjective. Whoever sees it as diluted is diluted. Others might not see it as diluted. They might see it as an alternative expression of Malay dance today. But gatekeeping becomes an issue when it stops people from doing what they feel is right for them, or when gatekeeping becomes an issue when artists they censor themselves because they feel that the community is not going to like the work that they do, etc. Right, and this is very real. Right, I face it. Many other of my contemporaries also face it. But also at the same time, I also see gatekeeping as a rites of passage, because, like for example, like I'm using a case study of somebody who I love very much, Abang Osman Hamid. When he was creating work that is focused on silat, and then there were also some touching and also some movements that might not look feminine or masculine, or it was too hyper masculine. He was also criticized for the work that he did, right? So he was criticized because people felt that you're not showing the gracefulness of what Malay dance is, right? And that means he was also being criticized by gatekeepers himself, and that was the rites of passage for him to realize that the work that he's done is contemporary in a sense, because traditionalists were also seeing it as not Malay enough, or not good, or not proper. right? But this is also something that I don't think is necessary, but I do feel that we cannot stop gatekeepers from feeling that they need to say what they need to say. And I also feel that we can't stop them from feeling a sense of passion to feel that the work that we do is not a representation of Malay dance or Malay culture or Malay community.
The point about gatekeeping, I guess one needs to can look at it the way you did, but I was thinking also people gatekeep because they have a stake. They have a stake, a very important stake in whatever it is they're saying, right? So there will be many gatekeepers because there are many people who are, who will be losing the stake. So, for example, I'm thinking of National Arts Council. Okay, so they have a stake. They have a stake in wanting to define, right, the labels that you've pointed out because they are administering. If we don't define this, then how are we to know, what is what? And because this ties with resources, right? Funding and so on. So,
Thank you for bringing up about stakeholders. There are many stakeholders in the promotion or the practice of a particular cultural form, right? You're not only seeing veterans, we also see the role of people, who are supporting the cultural form itself, administrators, etc. And it's true that sometimes stakeholders, they want certain things to look a certain way because it has functioned well for them. Probably due to how they feel, how people who hire them would want them to look a certain way, right? So I understand, and I think it's also acknowledging that rather than being upset with gatekeepers, I think to understand where they're coming from, because then we understand that what do they have to lose or what are they trying to retain, right? I like the example of the National Arts Council as being one stakeholder, because the definition of us under the traditional arts has also curtailed some things that certain artists would like to do without being put under the banner of traditional arts, right? Because the work that they do might not be about the tepak sirih, as in used as the tepak sirih itself, right? So I'm always constantly, and I think this is something that I always used, innovation as the DNA in Malay dance, right? It's something that we constantly innovate, trying to fulfill certain expectations, right? The tepak sirih is not used for dance, but it's used for dance today because, it is a form, is a prop that symbolizes a welcoming, to some extent. And this is, of course, to do with the Tari Persembahan, etc. as well, right? So it's also, that's why I always feel that an acknowledgement of the evolution of certain things is important, because if we were to look at certain things as just retained as what it was in a particular period of time, it's going to be difficult for this current generation to fully understand things. I think we also need to find a vocabulary to speak to my gen and the gens after me about what culture is, right? I'm constantly trying to get to push for intergenerational conversation that is not hierarchical, in a sense where we acknowledge that veterans are within the room, but we're also trying to say that not everything that they went through is relevant to us. We acknowledge, we thank you, we love you, we kiss your forehead, but also at the same time, you must also acknowledge that the experience of the Malay person today or of my generation is very different, right? So it's different because of the things, and our own struggles are different. I'm not diminishing your struggle, but my struggle is equally as relevant today.
Hi, my name is Shaful Bari Muhammad. Sorry, I'm going to put you in the spot again. So picking up from the previous two questions, right? So I think one, and because I don't come from the Malay dance space, but kind of have been working with yourself and a couple of others in that space, I've always wondered about the shifting of or the recognition of Malay dance within a contemporary space. And I realized that there are challenges in that. And I was wondering if you could comment. So here's my provocation, right, to you. One, in terms of from the Malay dance in itself, is cultural gatekeeping an issue that is born out of fear that if it's, if Malay dance discourse kind of goes into the contemporary space, it dilutes things? Because, we hear things about if practitioners in a more contemporary space are experimenting with stuff, they get called up by a council of elders who then, question them about some of these activities or what they've been doing. At the same time, with other stakeholders in the contemporary dance space, is there an arrogance from the contemporary dance space to kind of not include Malay kind of dance within a contemporary space? And other stakeholders like the National Arts Council, other arts institutions as well, is it a cultural blind spot? Are they myopic in not being able to see how Malay dance or more contemporary practices within Malay dance can also be intersectional? Is it just a case of our industries, all our respective industries, actually not being able to see the intersections in which we can exist in?
It's a very important question, thank you. It's tough to answer within a few minutes, but relevant nonetheless. Thank you, Shai. I do feel that there is a double bind or double opposing factors that puts us in a position, right? And this is also to do with how we choose to be represented, right? I choose to be Malay, but even when I don't choose to be Malay, others would tell me that I'm Malay, kind of thing, right? And this is the thing with traditional arts or Malay dance, right? Like sometimes my work, I don't feel that the works of my friends or my contemporaries might not be something that falls within something. They want to do it to be contemporary. I don't want to be contemporary Malay, but I just want it to be contemporary, right? But then you would have stakeholders elsewhere coming to say, oh no, but because of your Malay dance background, there is contemporary Malay. Or, but you're a brown person, so, it's contemporary Malay, that kind of thing. We are facing opposing factors here. An internal gatekeeping and an external gatekeeping, right? So the artist is placed within these very perilous positions between two opposing factors, and how should they circumnavigate and negotiate this, right? I do feel that the term traditional arts has become a very safe haven for a lot of practitioners because of the arrogance of the contemporary dancing. Because contemporary is also seen at times to be a middle-class Chinese/Western activity, that sometimes it does feel that a Malay person do not fit within the racial optics of such, right? Though there has been attempts by certain institutions to add more color to their festival, but you also feel a sense of, only a certain ideal concept, optics should fit within there, right? Right, and also the gatekeeping from the traditional art sector is also coming from a place of if this is the boundaries in which we have created for ourselves so that we are able to benefit from this, then the moment when we blur those, then what does it mean for this safe space? So it's a contradiction, it's an ironic circumstance that we're living in. But you're rightful to say of this double bind that we go through, that I can choose to do away with my Malay identity, I can choose to do away with my Malay dance background and create a work that's contemporary. But because I'm brown, because I'm Malay, therefore I am ethnic. Right? And this is the position this is a minoritized position. And I'm passionate about saying it this way because I find it very problematic when someone tells me, oh, it's subjective. The minoritized position it is subjective, but then it's also a position which you are being marginalized, and for you not to see it, it's a problem. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. These are shared also experiences of, of the process of marginalization, right? And the context. I have so many more questions to ask, but I wanted to, because I think we need to, round up, yeah, and we want our coffee. Just, an afterthought about, what you've said, and for all of us also to think about, right, in terms of how all these responses, yeah, actually have to do with changes that are occurring, and in context of changes. We are in a very a state of discomfort because there's very unfamiliar things that's happening around us. So it doesn't matter which generation we are talking about, which time or which time period. So there's all these uncertainties, and and the way to go is always to try and make things more certain, right? And what better way than to turn to things that one is familiar with. So I'm going to end what I say. I'm going to leave you to end with some words of wisdom, for all of us to take back with us, from this session.
I think the circumstances that we're living in is to do with the pragmatism of being Singaporean. I do feel that some of the situations that we face here is not faced within kindred communities in Malaysia and Indonesia. They have their own issues, right? And they have their own politics and problems that they're going through. So sometimes, when we try to find that shared heritage, we also need to acknowledge to what extent, how are they representing their culture, and how are we representing ours, because the Singapore Malay experience is different, right? But also at the same time, when we talk about difference, we must also acknowledge that, that the kindredness or the similarities that we face, that we have with our neighbors, are equally as relevant. I'm trying to say this because I'm acknowledging the fact that sometimes how the big G sometimes look at us and always trying to tell us that we are different from our kindred communities, right? Like, Singapore, the way Singapore Malays practice Islam is different from Malaysia and Indonesia. The way we identify, the way we understand multiculturalism is different from Malaysia and Indonesia. So it's always trying to segregate us, from the region that we live in, right? So I'm also recalling the works of Lili Zubaida Rahim, and the good work that Malay Studies Department is doing as well.
Thank you very much. So with that, I like to take this opportunity to thank you to be with us this morning. Please, everyone, join me to thank Dr. Noramin.